The wind howled over North Yorkshire's ancient moors, dry as old bone after weeks without rain. Even before Arabella Hastings reached the crest, a sinister red glow was already pulsing against the night sky, licking the heather in the distance. The warning sirens blared from her phone, but they were nothing compared to the roar of the fire itself, hungry, alive, and closing in. Arabella gripped the steering wheel of her battered rescue truck, knuckles white, eyes narrowed against the smoke that seeped in around the windows. Every nerve felt electrified. She'd gotten the call less than 10 minutes ago. A local hiker thought they'd seen movement by the old sheep trail, possibly a trapped foal, definitely in the path of the fire. Now, as the tires bounced over rutted ground, every shadow seemed alive, every gust of wind full of embers. The moors stretched endlessly on either side, black and red in the firelight, while ash danced like snow. The air inside the truck was thick, acrid, impossible to ignore, scratching her throat with every shallow breath. She could see the faint orange flicker reflecting off the glass of the dashboard, making her think for a moment that the world outside was burning in every direction. Suddenly, something darted across the headlights, a flash of chestnut, thin legs kicking at empty air. Arabella slammed the brakes, the truck skidding sideways in the gravel. For a second, all was still but the ticking of the engine and the relentless wind. She forced herself to breathe, heart hammering in her ears. There, in the swirling haze ahead, a small, trembling shape pressed up against a rusted metal gate. She grabbed her rescue kit, bolt cutters, old blanket, a halter, the essentials she'd learned never to leave behind. Stepping out, the heat hit her like a wall. Sparks jumped through the tall grass, lighting small, frantic fires that raced along the ground. Arabella hunched low, squinting against the wind, until she reached the battered gate. A young foal, barely more than a skeleton under his patchy coat, stared back at her with wide, unblinking eyes. His sides heaved, ribs sharp as knives. The faintest whimper escaped his lips. Arabella crouched, whispering softly as she worked the cutters over the thick, rusted chain, her own breath ragged. The metal groaned, the lock snapping with a harsh clang that was instantly swallowed by the chaos of the fire. She reached through, hands trembling, and slid the halter over the foal's narrow head. The foal flinched but did not bolt, maybe fear, maybe exhaustion, maybe something deeper. Arabella bundled him in the blanket, barely registering the prick of his bony shoulder against her own. Her mind flashed to the flames climbing a fallen branch just yards away. There was no time to think, only move. She lifted, gritting her teeth, feeling the trembling weight of a life not yet ready to be given up. Each step back to the truck felt a lifetime long, feet sinking into the scorched earth, hair full of ash. Behind her, the fire line advanced, crackling through the brush, every gust driving the inferno closer. She stumbled, nearly dropping her precious bundle, but righted herself, boots dragging through the dirt. The foal nuzzled weakly against her neck, the heat of his breath mixing with her own. She reached the truck, yanked open the passenger door, and laid the foal gently across the seat. His eyes blinked, slow and uncertain, but alive. Arabella let out a shaky laugh, a single tear carving a line through the soot on her cheek. There wasn't a second to lose. She gunned the engine, headlights cutting through the swirling smoke as she turned the truck toward the narrow access road that wound back through the moors. But as she pulled away, something in the side mirror caught her eye, a fleeting spectral movement in the fiery dark. Arabella looked again, heart twisting. There, illuminated by the flames, stood a mare, tall, silver gray, every muscle taut, scars visible even from a distance. She stood motionless, eyes locked on the truck, firelight painting her body in 100 shades of danger and defiance. Arabella hesitated, hand hovering over the horn, but the mare didn't flinch. Instead, she tossed her head and stepped forward, hooves silent on the cinders. The foal in the truck let out a faint cry, a desperate, broken sound. The mare answered, a low, guttural whining that cut through the chaos like a lifeline. The firestorm surged behind them, flames leaping higher, casting monstrous shadows across the hills. Arabella could see the edge of safety just ahead, a narrow dip in the land where the fire hadn't yet reached. No time for second guesses. She hit the gas, the truck bouncing and swaying, engine roaring. In the rear view, the mare followed, her strides long and determined, eyes fixed not on the fire, but on the truck. The moors became a blur, fire to one side, darkness to the other. Arabella's whole world shrank to the desperate thrum of the engine, the foal's shallow breaths, the impossible hope that somehow they'd make it through. Every mile felt like a battle, every bend in the road a test. The mare never faltered, keeping pace even as the smoke thickened and the wind howled louder. Ash and sparks swirled in their wake, the sky above painted in angry reds and bruised purples. Arabella's hands shook as she steered, but her jaw was set. She wouldn't lose them, not tonight, not to fire, not to fear, not to the ghosts of the past that haunted these moors. And as they plunged into the relative safety of the lower ground, the fire still raging behind, Arabella dared a glance in the mirror. The silver-gray mare was still there, battered but unbroken, a shadow against the fire, a promise that some bonds were stronger than fear. The first part of their journey was over, but the fire on the moors was only the beginning. The rescue truck thundered over the uneven track, its battered frame shuddering with every rut and dip. Arabella's eyes darted from the road ahead to the rearview mirror, her heart pounding in her chest as the wildfire clawed hungrily across the moors behind her. The air inside the cab felt heavy, thick with ash and fear. Beside her, the foal lay shivering, eyes glazed, nostrils flaring at the unfamiliar scent of burning earth and scorched heather. Flames glowed in the mirror, fiery giants racing over the land, swallowing ancient grasses and gorse, driven by a relentless wind. Arabella gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles white, as she pressed the accelerator harder. She had to make it out, had to get the foal to safety. Yet, every few seconds, her gaze flickered to that silver shape, still pacing them through the smoke and chaos. The mare, the gray, scarred survivor, Duchess, moved like a phantom along the embankment, muscles coiled beneath her shining coat. Even the fire couldn't touch the wild majesty in her stride. Arabella stole quick, anxious glances. Duchess never broke stride, her gaze fixed on the truck, the foal, her child. The world had become a tunnel of noise and light and fear, but the mare pressed on, unfaltering. A sudden burst of wind sent sparks swirling across the hood. Arabella coughed, blinking away tears. Her headlights sliced through the smoke, illuminating patches of charred grass, blackened stone, and the spectral reflection of Duchess's body weaving through the night. Every time the flames licked closer, the mare veered just out of reach, moving with an animal intelligence that belonged to another age. As the access road twisted around a low ridge, Arabella was forced to slow. The truck's wheels crunched over loose gravel, the engine struggling up the incline. She cast another glance at the mirror, breath caught in her throat. Duchess had fallen back, her head low, chest heaving from exertion. For a terrible moment, Arabella thought the mare would turn away, bolt for the open moors, vanish into the darkness and smoke forever. But Duchess didn't break. With a flick of her scarred neck, she surged forward, eyes blazing in the firelight, determination burning hotter than the flames. Behind her, a tree collapsed, showering the moor in sparks. Arabella flinched, feeling the heat even inside the cab. The foal whimpered, a broken, desperate sound, as if pleading for his mother to keep coming. Each passing second felt like an eternity. The world shrank to the narrow ribbon of road, the burning sky, and the three of them, human, foal, and the wild, wounded mare, all bound together by terror and hope. Arabella's mind raced. If the truck stalled now, if the fire jumped the road, if the mare gave up. No, she wouldn't let herself think it, not when they'd come this far. The radio crackled uselessly. Emergency services were stretched thin, and the old stone walls that bordered the moor offered little protection against the relentless advance of the flames. Arabella risked a glance to her right. Through the dirty glass, she caught glimpses of Duchess, mane streaming, scars on her shoulder illuminated with every flicker of firelight. She remembered her father's words from childhood, about the moors, about the old blood that ran through horses like Duchess. "They don't give up," he'd said, voice low and certain, "not when it matters." That faith kept Arabella going, even as fear chewed at the edge of her mind. Suddenly, the road ahead was blocked, a fallen branch smoldering, fire licking its edges. Arabella slammed on the brakes, the truck fishtailing as it skidded to a halt. Smoke rushed in through the vents, making her eyes water. The foal whinnied in panic, scrambling weakly at the seat. No time to hesitate. Arabella leapt from the cab, boots sinking into mud and cinders. She grabbed the rescue axe, teeth clenched, heart thrumming. The heat was unbearable, the world alive with sound, the snap and pop of burning wood, the distant wail of sirens, the frantic pulse of her own breath. With a grunt, she brought the axe down on the branch, again and again, splinters flying. Each swing sent fresh sparks into the air. Duchess appeared in the corner of her vision, circling nervously, nostrils flared, hooves stamping. For a moment, horse and woman locked eyes, fear and trust mingling in the red-lit haze. The branch gave way at last, rolling aside just enough to clear a path. Arabella darted back to the truck, adrenaline screaming through her veins. She drove forward, bumping over the debris. Duchess hesitated, then sprang after them, muscles straining, mane flying. She ran closer than ever, almost parallel to the cab, the fire reflecting in her eyes. Arabella focused on the foal, on the mare, on the precious lives depending on her. The old rescue truck rattled and groaned, but kept moving, wheels churning through mud and ash. For mile after mile, Duchess kept pace, never faltering, not even when the fire's edge brushed so close Arabella could feel the heat through the glass. Thunder rumbled somewhere far off, but no rain came, only wind, only fire. Yet the danger brought a strange unity, a sense that out here on the wild moors, lines between wild and tamed, past and present, blurred and faded. Arabella felt it in her bones. She was not just rescuing these horses. She was part of something ancient, a bond forged in fear, courage, and hope. As the worst of the fire faded behind them, the land grew quieter, the world narrowing to the soft sound of hoofbeats and the hum of the engine. Duchess slowed, breath steaming in the cool air, sides heaving from exertion. Arabella eased the truck to a stop at the edge of the Hall grounds. She climbed out, chest aching with relief. For a long, breathless moment, Duchess stood in the headlights, smoke curling from her coat, the scars on her chest shining in the artificial light. Then, silently, she stepped forward and pressed her muzzle against the cab, close enough to touch, but not quite trusting, not yet. Arabella felt the world shift, something powerful passing between them in the dark. She whispered a promise into the night, words lost in the wind. Then, together, woman, foal, and mare crossed the threshold into Wild Haven, leaving the fire and an old world behind. Dawn crawled reluctantly over the North Yorkshire moors, bathing the battered stone walls and ancient rooftops of Brambleford Hall in a pale, uncertain light. Wild Haven, the sanctuary Arabella had carved from the bones of her family's estate, was stirring to life, though for a few precious moments the world remained hushed and still, as if holding its breath. Arabella stepped out of the rescue truck, boots crunching softly on the dew-damp gravel. The air was heavy with the mingled scent of smoke and fresh grass. She paused, hand resting on the open door, and let her eyes adjust to the subtle colors of morning. The pink glow on the distant hills, the silver mist snaking through the ancient oaks. Behind her, the foal, Ash, shifted on the worn blanket, eyelids fluttering as he dreamed fitfully. She coaxed the trembling colt onto unsteady legs, arms gentle but firm. Ash took a tentative step, then another, legs wobbling but refusing to give in. Arabella kept one hand on his thin neck, feeling the wiry strength beneath the fragile skin. With patience born from years of rescue, she led him toward the arched stone entrance, where the fated sign, Wild Haven, creaked in the early breeze. Inside the sanctuary walls, life moved quietly but purposefully. The old stone stables, lovingly restored, framed a grassy courtyard dotted with weathered wooden benches and the odd wildflower stubbornly growing between the stones. A low dome of rough-hewn granite, a relic from an earlier age, rose at the center. The heart of Wild Haven, now shelter and storeroom, once a crypt for Brambleford's ancestors. A barn owl, startled from the rafters by Arabella's approach, swooped silently away into the morning fog. Farther along the lane, the first of the volunteers were arriving. Tall, bearded Dr. Thomas Whitaker, a stoic former Army medic turned veterinarian, and a trio of eager students clutching mugs of tea and notebooks filled with scrawled observations. Their chatter was muted by the events of the night, each glance toward Arabella full of unspoken questions and worry. Whitaker crossed the courtyard in long, purposeful strides. He paused, nodding briefly to Arabella before focusing on Ash with a practiced eye. No words were needed. Together, they coaxed the foal into a straw-lined stall beside the main barn. Ash, shivering, pressed against the back wall, eyes darting from Arabella to Whitaker and back again.
The gray mare, Duchess, stood just outside the open door, motionless in the golden haze. Scars marked her flanks and chest, long and cruel, a map of old battles. For a moment she only watched, tail swishing idly, before lowering her head to sniff at the straw beneath her hooves. The morning light revealed a quiet dignity in her posture, the hard-earned poise of a survivor. Arabella caught her breath, watching as Duchess stepped inside the stall, keeping her distance from Ash yet refusing to leave him alone. She moved with deliberate calm, her presence reassuring, even as she ignored the bucket of oats placed nearby. Not a bite, not a sound beyond the gentle thud of her hooves and the soft, rhythmic rise and fall of her breath. Whitaker knelt, hands sure and gentle, examining Ash. His touch traced the lines of injury, the places where skin was scraped and fur matted. He listened to the colt's heart, pressed a stethoscope to his narrow chest, murmured a soft, approving hum as Ash steadied under his hands. With a silent signal, he passed Arabella a bottle of electrolyte solution, and together they coaxed the foal to drink. Outside, the volunteers set to work, hauling buckets, mucking out stalls, rolling hay bales into the yard. The sun climbed higher, warming the courtyard, chasing the last wisps of mist away. Birds began to sing, tentative at first, then with growing confidence. But inside Duchess's stall, time seemed to slow to a gentle crawl. Hours passed. Arabella perched on an upturned crate, watching the pair. Duchess remained by the doorway, eyes flicking between her colt and the world outside. Every so often, she would nudge Ash's flank with her scarred nose, urging him to stand, to try, to keep going. Yet she refused every morsel, hay, oats, even a bucket of cool water. Not until Ash found his feet, not until she was sure. The sanctuary's daily rhythm moved around them, hoofbeats echoing on the flagstones, the creak of wheelbarrows, snippets of laughter, and low, serious conversation. But the real drama played out in quiet moments. Ash, legs trembling, rising and sinking, rising again. Duchess, head bowed, waiting, willing her colt to survive. Arabella watched it all, heart swelling with hope and fear in equal measure. By midday, Ash managed a few unsteady laps around the stall, his body swaying but stronger with every pass. Duchess finally lowered her head to the water bucket, lips parting, tongue flicking over the surface. She drank deeply, sides heaving in relief. The tension in her shoulders seemed to melt away. Outside, a gentle breeze rustled the tall grass beyond the walls. Whitaker, leaning on the door, allowed himself a rare, satisfied smile. Arabella let her gaze wander over the sanctuary. The repaired stonework, the tidy rows of stalls, the weathered wooden fences that kept the wildness of the moor at bay. This place, once haunted by memories and debt, was now a haven for those the world had nearly forgotten. Every corner held a story: rescued horses, grateful veterans, students learning the patient language of animal care. The day wore on, marked by quiet, deliberate action rather than chaos. Ash drifted into exhausted sleep, Duchess finally resting by his side. Outside, the volunteers laughed as a pair of ponies played tug-of-war with a frayed old rope. For a moment, the world felt safe, sheltered from flames and loss, wrapped in the sturdy embrace of stone and trust. Evening approached, and the sanctuary glowed with golden light. Arabella moved through the courtyard, checking gates, feeding the animals, exchanging quiet nods with her team. Every so often, she paused at Duchess's stall, watching as the mare breathed in the cool air, Ash curled close against her. In that silence, in that slow, hopeful return to life, Arabella found a kind of peace she hadn't known in years. And above it all, the moors waited, silent, eternal, full of secrets. But tonight, at least, Wild Haven was safe, and life, however fragile, had a chance to begin again. Sunrise brought a soft, honeyed light that streamed through the ancient leaded glass of Brambleford Hall stables. Wild Haven was fully awake now. The busy rhythm of the sanctuary pulsed through every stone and wooden beam. The scrape of metal forks on straw, the gentle clop of hooves, the faint, contented sighs of horses resting after a long night. Arabella's boots echoed in the corridor as she made her way to Duchess's stall. She paused at the half-door, drawing a deep breath, savoring the mingled scents of hay, leather, and morning air. Ash, the foal, was sleeping, legs tucked neatly under his small frame, breathing evenly for the first time since their escape. Duchess stood guard behind him, eyes half closed, her body always between the colt and the open world. The sunlight slanted in, illuminating the pale silver gray of Duchess's coat. Up close, the scars were unmistakable. Angry, rough-edged lines slashed across her chest and flank, some old and white, others still pink and sensitive. Arabella let her hand rest lightly on the door, fingers curled over the wood. Each mark spoke of a different chapter: hardship, violence, survival. Whitaker arrived, carrying his battered leather medical bag. He moved quietly, his military past betrayed only by the rigid set of his shoulders and the directness of his gaze. He nodded once to Arabella, then crouched near Duchess, hands calm and measured. The examination began in silence. Whitaker's fingers traced the edges of each scar, eyes narrowing as he uncovered the remnants of old stitches, the faint texture of brands long since faded. Duchess did not move, save for a subtle flick of her ear as he touched a particularly deep gash near her withers. He knelt lower, brushing the mare's thick coat aside. There, half concealed by the silver hair and the jagged outline of a healed wound, a faint series of numbers and letters appeared, partially scrubbed out, but still visible in the right light. Whitaker glanced up, meeting Arabella's eyes. He didn't need to say a word. She understood instantly. Arabella's heart beat faster. She pulled her phone from her pocket, snapped a photo, and hurried into the cramped sanctuary office, walls lined with shelves of old books and stacks of paperwork. The computer on the corner desk flickered to life. Arabella's fingers danced across the keyboard as she searched the UK's Central Equine Passport database, a bureaucratic labyrinth she'd navigated more times than she cared to count. Her search began with the number. The system churned, slow as always. Minutes dragged by, punctuated only by the distant sound of hoofbeats, the rhythmic thud of the volunteers at work. Then, abruptly, a record appeared on the screen. Duchess. Registered under a previous name, but the description matched. Silver-gray mare, height, distinctive blaze on the nose, documented scars. The owner field listed a name Arabella recognized, though it still sent a chill up her spine. Sir Reginald Montfort. One of the most notorious racehorse breeders in the north, his reputation whispered about in stables from London to Edinburgh. Arabella leaned back, the old chair creaking. Sir Reginald's operation had always been shrouded in rumors, importing auction horses from Ireland and France, cutting costs, disposing of those he deemed unprofitable. Every few years, another scandal surfaced. A barn fire, a string of unexplained injuries, animals quietly vanishing from his books. Yet nothing ever seemed to stick. Arabella's fingers clenched on the desk. She scrolled through the digital file, her stomach tightening as the details emerged. Duchess had arrived at Montfort Stud nearly 3 years earlier, part of a shipment of project horses meant to be trained for resale. The notes mentioned difficult temperament, untreatable wounds, and, coldly, without feeling, recommended disposal. No one at Montfort had even bothered to file the missing horse report until last week. Arabella shut her eyes for a moment, blocking out the hum of the computer, the distant sounds of the sanctuary. Her anger built, slow and steady. She pictured Duchess, proud even in her suffering, scars shining in the firelight as she followed her child through hell. There was nothing disposable about her. She was a survivor, fierce, intelligent, determined to protect. Back in the barn, Whitaker was gently cleaning a fresh scrape on Ash's knee. Arabella watched Duchess shift her weight, muscles tensing as she hovered protectively over her colt. Whitaker offered the mare a handful of hay, murmuring something low and soothing. Duchess accepted it this time, chewing slowly, eyes never leaving her foal. Arabella moved closer, crouching at the stall door, her voice quiet as she spoke, not to Duchess, but to herself. "You're safe now. Whatever he's done, whatever he's planning, this is your home. We don't give up here." The day moved forward in slow, measured beats. Outside, the sanctuary bustled, but inside the stall, time seemed suspended. Arabella watched the light over Duchess's scars, each one a reminder of pain and survival, of old wounds that would never quite disappear. She wondered how many other horses carried similar stories, their suffering hidden beneath shining coats and official documents. The thought haunted her. Toward evening, a soft rain began to fall, pattering against the slate roofs. Arabella stood by the office window, the printed file on Duchess spread out on the desk beside her. She watched as the volunteers herded the other horses in from the paddocks, laughter mingling with the thrum of rain. In Duchess's stall, Ash had drifted into another deep sleep, safe beneath his mother's watchful gaze.
Arabella picked up her phone and dialed a familiar number, her old contact at the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. She left a message, her words steady, her resolve clear. "I have a horse registered to Sir Reginald Montfort, scarred, malnourished, dumped in the path of a wildfire. I want an investigation." She hung up, feeling a small surge of hope mixed with dread. There was no telling how Montfort would respond, but she had no intention of backing down. Outside, the sky darkened and the rain fell harder. The world felt fragile, uncertain. But inside Wildhaven, where scars were honored and second chances given, hope flickered. Quiet, stubborn, impossible to extinguish. And as Arabella stepped back into the barn, she found Duchess watching her, eyes deep and unwavering. For the first time, Arabella let herself believe that the story of those scars was not just about pain. It was about survival and the possibility of something better waiting on the other side. Morning broke with a sullen sky, clouds hanging low over the moors, a persistent drizzle turning the gravel drive to mud. Arabella stood by the stable window, a mug of lukewarm coffee cradled in her hands, watching droplets trace winding paths down the glass. The air inside Wildhaven was tense. Even the horses seemed to sense the change. ears flicking, hooves shifting restlessly on the straw, eyes turning toward the gate with quiet apprehension. The tranquility shattered at 9 sharp. A black sedan rolled through the open iron gates, tires splashing through puddles. Its paint gleamed cold and perfect in the wet, an alien presence among the battered rescue vehicles and rusted farm tools. The car stopped near the entrance, engine idling, headlights shining pale through the rain. The driver, a man in a pressed suit, stepped out, a leather portfolio clutched beneath one arm. Arabella's heart tightened. She set her mug aside, wiped her hands on her jeans, and walked out to meet him, boots squelching in the mud. Whitaker emerged from the barn, silent as always, shadowing her steps. The volunteers watched from a distance, curiosity and concern written plainly on their faces. The man introduced himself as Montford's solicitor, voice smooth and practiced. Without preamble, he withdrew an envelope from the portfolio and handed it to Arabella. The paper was thick, embossed with an unfamiliar crest. Arabella broke the seal and unfolded the letter. Her eyes scanned the elegant script, her mind racing to absorb the meaning beneath the legal jargon. It was, on the surface, straightforward. A demand that Duchess be returned immediately to the rightful owner, Sir Reginald Montford, along with a detailed invoice for the care and boarding of his horse, and a threat of legal action if she refused. Nowhere in the letter was there mention of Duchess's condition, the fire, or the welfare of her foal. Only property, only value. Whitaker read over her shoulder, jaw set, eyes dark. The volunteers shifted uneasily. Arabella felt anger spark in her chest, but she forced herself to remain calm, fingers tightening around the letter until the edges crumpled. She thanked the solicitor, her voice steady, and watched as he returned to the car, umbrella snapping open as the rain intensified. The sedan disappeared as quickly as it had come, leaving only the echo of threat and the scent of exhaust. She walked back inside, shoulders rigid, mind swirling with doubt and determination. In the office, she laid the letter on the desk, the words blurring as droplets of rain dripped from her hair. Whitaker followed her, closing the door gently behind him. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The weight of the moment pressed in on both of them. Arabella pulled out the folder of documents she'd gathered on Duchess. Medical records, photos of the scars, the printouts from the equine passport database. She leafed through them, lips pressed tight, searching for something she could use. It all felt flimsy. The law was complicated, Montford's reach even more so. Arabella stared at the ceiling, listening to the rain drum against the slates, the distant rumble of thunder rolling across the hills. The sanctuary suddenly felt small, vulnerable, the old stone walls incapable of holding back the outside world. A sense of futility rose inside, bitter and cold. But then, from outside, came the low, steady rhythm of hoofbeats. Duchess, drawn by the tension in the air, paced along the fence line, pausing every few steps to glance back at the barn where Ash slept. There was a stubbornness in her gait, a refusal to be intimidated by threats or paperwork. Arabella watched her, something fierce flickering to life again in her chest.
She returned to the barn, pausing at Duchess's stall. The mare met her gaze, calm and unwavering. For a moment, the world shrank to just the two of them, standing in silent defiance against the storm. Arabella reached over the door, resting her hand gently on Duchess's neck, feeling the warmth beneath the scarred skin. Word spread quickly through the village. By midday, neighbors arrived at the hall, some bearing casseroles or bread, others simply offering their presence. A retired schoolteacher delivered a bundle of fresh linens. 2 students from the veterinary college showed up with extra medical supplies, asking if Arabella needed help documenting the horse's condition. Even the postman lingered a little longer, dropping off the daily letters with a reassuring nod. Inside, Arabella drafted her response to Montford. No lawyer, no flowery language, just the truth, written plainly and firmly. She included copies of Duchess's medical reports, photographs of the burns and scars, and a summary of Ash's rescue from the fire. She quoted sections of the Animal Welfare Act, emphasizing that any claim to ownership must be secondary to the welfare of the animals involved. She signed her name and mailed the letter, hands trembling but spirit unbroken. That night, as the rain eased and a cold mist crept through the courtyard, Arabella walked the grounds in silence. The sanctuary glowed softly under lantern light, the horses dozing in their stalls, breath steaming in the cool air. She passed the old granite dome, feeling the weight of generations pressing down. Ancestors who'd built this place stone by stone, who'd endured hardship and loss and refused to yield. Inside Duchess's stall, Ash stirred, nuzzling against his mother's side. Duchess stood over him, eyes closed, chest rising and falling with each calm breath. Arabella lingered, watching, listening to the rhythm of life resuming in the aftermath of threat. The legal battle had only just begun. Arabella knew the days ahead would be hard, filled with paperwork, fear, and uncertainty. But as she looked at Duchess, at Ash, at the quiet resilience of her sanctuary, she found a stubborn hope rooting deeper within her. This place was more than property, more than a ledger of assets and liabilities. It was a haven. It was a promise. As she closed the barn door, the wind shifted, blowing fresh air from the moors, carrying with it the faint, wild scent of heather and rain. Arabella breathed it in, letting it steady her heart, resolve settling like stone in her chest. Whatever came next, she would not stand alone. Wildhaven belonged to all who believed in second chances, and she would fight for it, come what may. Night fell hard and fast, swallowing the moors in a storm that had blown in from the Atlantic with little warning. Wind lashed against the old stones of Brambleford Hall, rattling shutters, tossing branches, howling down chimneys. The rain, heavy as gravel, hammered the roof of the sanctuary. Arabella watched the storm gather from her office window, a cold unease growing in her chest. Lightning flickered far out over the hills, illuminating the wild, churning clouds, and with every flash, the world seemed to shudder. Inside, the animals shifted uneasily, sensing something strange in the air. Even the hardiest horses, used to wind and weather, fidgeted in their stalls. Arabella made her rounds, flashlight beam darting through the darkened barn, checking gates, stroking anxious necks, murmuring quiet reassurances. In Duchess's stall, Ash pressed close to his mother, the foal's eyes wide, ears flicking at every rumble of thunder. The power flickered, then failed. Arabella's phone screen became her only source of light as she checked her messages. Flood warnings for low-lying areas, a note from Whitaker that he'd be delayed by fallen trees, and another email from Montford's lawyers, as cold and impersonal as the rain slamming the windows. She silenced the phone and tucked it away. The night demanded her full attention. A crash outside sent her running to the main gate. The old wooden door to the paddock had blown open, swinging wildly on its hinges, battered by wind and rain. Arabella fought the storm to drag it shut, latching it with frozen fingers. Her clothes clung to her, drenched in minutes. As she turned to head back inside, she heard another sound, a splash, a sharp cry from somewhere beyond the fence. Her heart leapt. She sprinted along the slippery path, boots sinking into mud. Lightning slashed across the sky, illuminating the scene for a single searing instant. Ash, the foal, struggling in the swollen ditch beside the lane, his thin legs flailing as water surged around him. The bank, usually dry, had become a torrent, the current tugging at his tiny body, panic bright in his eyes.
Duchess paced along the edge, nostrils flared, tail lashing the rain. She reared up, hooves flashing, then dropped down to paw at the muddy earth, but she couldn't reach Ash. The foal let out a plaintive bleat, legs churning, mouth open to the rushing water. Arabella felt every nerve ignite. There was no time to think, only to move. She vaulted the fence, landing hard on the far side, and slid down the bank toward the foal. The water was ice cold, numbing her hands as she reached for Ash, catching hold of his sodden mane. The mud sucked at her boots, the current tried to pull her away, but she gritted her teeth, bracing herself against the pull. Duchess thundered along the bank, whinnying low, the storm muffling every sound except for the crash of water and the frantic struggle in the ditch. Ash slipped beneath the surface, legs kicking weakly. Arabella plunged her arms deeper, locking her grip around the foal's chest, lifting with everything she had. Her breath came in ragged bursts, rain blinding her eyes, hair plastered to her face. Inch by inch, she dragged Ash up the bank, boots slipping, knees scraping on stones. Duchess lunged forward, teeth bared, pawing at the earth as if she would tear the storm itself apart. With one final effort, Arabella heaved Ash clear of the water. The foal collapsed in a trembling heap, sides heaving, mouth open wide. Arabella pulled him into her arms, rocking him gently, murmuring soothing nonsense, barely aware of her own shivers. Duchess bent her head, muzzle pressing against Arabella's shoulder, the mare's breath hot and urgent. For a moment, everything else faded, the storm, the lawsuits, the threat hanging over Wildhaven. There was only this circle of warmth and trust, the battered sanctuary of three souls huddled together against the night. Arabella pressed her forehead to Duchess's neck, feeling the mare's heartbeat thunder in time with her own. Ash stirred, coughing weakly. Arabella wiped mud from his nose, checking his limbs, searching for wounds. Duchess nuzzled the foal's damp flank, her great body trembling, but her eyes held only fierce determination. She knelt beside her child, blocking the wind with her own frame, inviting Ash to lean against her warmth. Arabella guided them both back toward the shelter of the barn. The wind fought her every step, pushing sideways, battering the three of them with icy sheets of rain. But Duchess did not falter. Each time Ash stumbled, she steadied him with a gentle nudge. Arabella followed, her own strength flagging, but the stubborn resolve in Duchess's stride became her anchor. Inside the stable, the world felt smaller, safer. Arabella spread fresh straw in Duchess's stall, drying Ash with an old towel, heart pounding as the foal's breathing eased, slow and steady at last. She offered Duchess a bucket of water, which the mare drained in one long, grateful gulp. Ash, still trembling, curled up at her side, his tiny head buried in the soft gray of her coat. As Arabella sat beside them, exhaustion hit her like a wave. She rested her back against the stall wall, watching as Duchess settled, eyes half closed, body wrapped protectively around her colt. Rain drummed on the roof above, thunder rolling farther and farther away. Arabella closed her eyes, just for a moment. A soft, warm pressure against her shoulder brought her back. Duchess, gently pressing her forehead to Arabella's arm, a silent gesture of trust that needed no words. Arabella let her hand rest on the mare's neck, grateful and awed by the fragile peace they'd forged in the storm. Outside, the winds slowly quieted. The night pressed close, heavy with the scent of wet earth and hay. For the first time in days, Arabella allowed herself to believe they might weather what was coming, not because of legal victories or iron gates, but because they had chosen to trust, to save each other, even when the world was coming apart. In the darkness, the bond was sealed, woman, mare, and foal, united by storm, survival, and the stubborn hope that together they could endure whatever trials lay ahead. The storm left the moors battered, trees downed, and the ground saturated with cold, dark water. By dawn, Wildhaven shimmered under a thin, uncertain sunlight. Arabella moved stiffly through the courtyard, mud caked to her boots, the memory of the night's ordeal still raw in her bones. Yet, as always, the sanctuary came alive with the morning. A routine of hay bales, gentle voices, the clatter of pails, and the comforting rhythm of hooves. But something in the air had changed. It wasn't just the wreckage from the storm, or the way the wind whistled through the gaps in the stone. There was an anxiety now, palpable and persistent, growing with every passing hour. Arabella felt it in the glances of her volunteers, the hush that fell when her phone rang, the way her own hands shook slightly as she poured out feed for Duchess and Ash. By mid-morning, the first sign arrived, a sharp digital ping. Arabella's phone lit up, flooded with notifications. Her email was stuffed with messages from addresses she didn't recognize, all bearing subject lines about horse theft, legal rights, and animal welfare violations. She scrolled through social media and saw a barrage of posts, some sympathetic, many aggressive, all referencing a scandal breaking in the tabloids. Her heart sank. Montford's influence moved faster than wildfire. Within hours, the story was everywhere. Heiress accused of stealing champion mare. Animal rights hypocrisy at Yorkshire sanctuary. Wild Haven holds valuable horse hostage. Photos of Duchess, taken from the rescue, were splashed across every headline. Her scars and wary eyes misrepresented as signs of abuse, not survival. Arabella pressed her palms to her temples, forcing herself to breathe. She found herself reading the comments, even when she knew she shouldn't. Strangers calling for Duchess to be returned, doubting Arabella's motives. Some threatening investigations, others calling her a hero. The sanctuary's page filled with furious messages and cruel memes, but also with outpourings of support from old friends, former volunteers, and those who knew the truth. That afternoon, Inspector Clive Morgan from DEFRA arrived, tall, rain-soaked, eyes hard with the burden of his office. He greeted Arabella with a brief nod, then flashed his identification. He said little, voice clipped and official, but Arabella recognized the tension in his posture. Montford's accusations had brought public pressure. Morgan was here to respond. She led him through the grounds, past the old granite dome, the stalls where rescued horses grazed or napped in the weak sunlight. Morgan walked quietly, making notes, occasionally pausing to watch a volunteer groom a trembling new arrival or to photograph the clean water troughs, the fresh bedding. When they reached Duchess's stall, he lingered, watching the mare as she shielded Ash with her body, her scars a stark, silent testimony. Morgan studied the medical files Whitaker had prepared, records of treatment, photographs of healing wounds, the timeline of Duchess and Ash's rescue. Arabella handed him a file with printouts of online threats and slander, highlighting the speed and intensity of Montford's campaign. Morgan frowned, lips pressed tight, but gave nothing away. Throughout the inspection, the sanctuary buzzed with nervous activity. Volunteers whispered as they passed, eyes darting to Arabella, searching her face for signs of hope or despair. A few quietly filmed parts of the visit on their phones, uploading short clips to the sanctuary's social media. Simple, honest footage of Duchess nuzzling Ash, Arabella tending to a limping pony, a student gently explaining hoof care to a curious child. Outside, news vans lined the lane. Reporters clustered at the gates, cameras raised, voices urgent, hunting for a statement or a glimpse of drama. The atmosphere thickened, every movement watched, every word recorded. Arabella kept her head high, heart pounding, forcing herself to focus on the rhythm of care, the steady, deliberate work of feeding, cleaning, and healing. Wild Haven was under siege, yet it refused to falter. As the sun dipped low, the sky bruised with clouds, Morgan gathered his notes and prepared to leave. He paused at the entrance, gaze lingering on Arabella. For the first time, a glimmer of warmth flickered in his eyes. "You run a tight operation," he said quietly, then vanished into the growing night, leaving behind an air of uncertainty, but also a thread of hope. The internet storm only grew. Late into the night, Arabella sat in her office, watching the tide of public opinion surge and crash, voices arguing, some defending, others demanding answers. She replied where she could, sharing photos of Duchess's recovery, the rescue from the fire, the care lavished on every animal. Support began to coalesce. A former vet wrote a public letter, a local journalist published a thoughtful editorial. Neighbors posted videos from the night of the fire, showing Arabella risking everything to save Duchess and Ash. Yet the attacks didn't stop. Montfort hired security to patrol his own estate, making statements to the press about dangerous radicals and organized theft. He threatened lawsuits, stirred up rumors, even hinted at criminal charges. Wildhaven felt the pressure like a vice, the sense of siege growing heavier with each new accusation. Still, the sanctuary fought back. Volunteers organized live streams, walking viewers through the stables, introducing the horses, answering questions about animal care and the legal complexities of rescue work. Viewers from around the country and even from abroad tuned in, some donating money, others offering legal advice or simply words of encouragement.
Arabella moved through it all with a stubborn resolve, her spirit tested but not broken. She watched Duchess and Ash in the quiet moments between the chaos, finding in their fragile peace a reminder of why she fought. Each small act of care, each moment of trust, became a silent act of resistance. As the night deepened and the world beyond the sanctuary grew louder and more uncertain, Wildhaven's old stones seemed to stand a little taller, the lamps glowing golden against the encroaching dark. Arabella knew the battle was far from over. Montfort's reach was long and his resources vast. But she also knew something had shifted. Strangers had become allies. The public eye had turned, and the fight for Duchess and Ash had become something greater than herself. In the midst of crisis, the sanctuary found its true voice, not in shouting, but in the quiet, daily acts of love, trust, and courage that could not be twisted by headlines or drowned by scandal. And so, as the world watched, Wildhaven endured, the struggle only strengthening the fragile bonds that held it together. Day broke cold and colorless, the mist rising thick from the sodden moors. The old stones of Brambleford Hall seemed to absorb the anxiety hanging over Wildhaven. Arabella awoke before sunrise, her mind fogged by half-slept dreams of fire, running hooves, voices calling her name in the dark. The storm had passed, but the world outside remained unsettled. In the barns, horses shifted restlessly, noses pressed against stall doors, picking up on every ounce of tension in the air. She moved through the morning ritual in a haze, pouring feed, checking water, brushing mud from Duchess's coat, and combing twigs from Ash's mane. All the while, her eyes kept drifting to the gates, to the winding road that led up from the village. The air outside was unnaturally still, the calm before another storm. The first sign came just after 8, a low rumble, engines humming. A convoy of trucks and vans crawled up the lane, headlights piercing the mist. Leading the procession was a massive horse trailer, emblazoned with Montfort Stud's gold crest. Behind it came a pair of black SUVs, windows tinted, doors adorned with the logo of a private security company. Arabella felt her pulse quicken, her breath clouding in the cold as she watched the vehicles approach, a line of silent threat winding toward her sanctuary. News had spread quickly through Brambleford. By the time the trucks arrived, villagers had begun to gather at the gates. Old men in worn flat caps, mothers with children bundled against the chill, students from the veterinary college with bright eyes and determined faces. Arabella recognized many of them, people she'd helped or comforted or simply shared a cup of tea with in quieter days. Their faces were grim but resolved. The trucks stopped in a tight formation just outside the sanctuary's iron gates. The lead security guard stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered in a black raincoat, a radio clipped to his belt. Montford's solicitor emerged beside him, portfolio in hand, flanked by a photographer and a man holding a video camera. They didn't speak, but their message was clear. This was to be a show of force. Arabella stood tall at the center of the yard, hands clenched at her sides, every muscle taut. Whitaker joined her, shoulders squared, gaze locked on the guards. A hush fell as the crowd of villagers pressed closer to the gate, forming a loose wall of bodies between Wildhaven and the outside world. A tense moment passed, everyone waiting to see who would move first. Then a voice rang out, an old veteran, voice hoarse but steady. "You'll have to go through us." He stepped forward, cane planted firmly in the mud, chin lifted in defiance. Others followed. A group of students streamed the confrontation live on their phones, narrating every move, every exchange, for an audience already swelling online. The security guards hesitated, their rehearsed confidence shaken by the growing wall of people. The solicitor read out his demands in a clipped, icy voice. Immediate surrender of Duchess, compensation for damages, the right to inspect the entire sanctuary. His words echoed off the stones, falling flat in the cold air. No one moved to open the gates. Instead, a woman in a nurse's uniform unfurled a homemade banner. "You earn loyalty, you don't buy it." The crowd took up the phrase, voices rising together in a chant that drowned the engines, the legal threats, the bluster of security men unused to resistance. Inside the barn, the horses grew agitated. Duchess pressed close to Ash, head low, eyes fixed on the door. Arabella glanced at her, feeling the weight of responsibility, the impossibility of surrendering this battered family to the hands that had already failed them.
Inspector Morgan arrived, slipping quietly through the crowd, not in uniform, but with the same air of authority. He spoke in low tones to the villagers, to the guards, moving calmly between groups, taking in the whole scene. Cameras tracked his every step. He requested to speak with Arabella privately, but she shook her head. There would be no more decisions made in the shadows. Instead, Morgan addressed the crowd from the gates. His words were measured, chosen with care. He reminded everyone that animal welfare law, not property claims, govern disputes like this. He called for restraint, for respect, for truth over rumor and bluster. The villagers listened, but their resolve didn't waver. Montford's men, unaccustomed to being denied, began to grow restless. One security guard made a move toward the gate. Immediately, a line of villagers linked arms, blocking the entrance. Their faces were tense but determined. Students filmed everything, their feeds broadcasting the standoff live to hundreds, then thousands across the country. Hours passed, the tension unbroken. The guards made occasional half-hearted attempts to negotiate, but the villagers stood firm, their numbers only growing as word spread. Every so often, a new face would appear, a retired farmer, a young mother with a child on her hip, a pair of delivery drivers who'd finished their morning rounds and joined the barricade. Inside, Arabella checked on Duchess and Ash, finding them pressed together in a far corner of their stall. Duchess nickered softly, recognizing her. Arabella stroked her neck, whispering quiet promises that felt half prayer, half oath. She knew the fight was far from over, that the law could be bent and twisted by those with enough money or influence. But she also knew something had changed. Wild Haven was no longer alone. Afternoon faded into dusk, the air growing colder, the standoff unbroken. Montford's team finally began to withdraw, frustration etched on every face. The villagers stood aside just enough to let the trucks reverse out, cheers erupting as the convoy rolled back down the lane, banners waving, phones still broadcasting. Inspector Morgan lingered at the gate, watching as the last SUV vanished into the mist. He caught Arabella's eye and nodded, a faint, weary smile breaking through his usual reserve. Arabella exhaled, shoulders slumping in relief. Whittaker clapped her gently on the back, his silence full of approval and pride. As night settled over the sanctuary, the last villagers departed, some offering words of support, others simply a squeeze of the hand or a clap on the shoulder. The yard grew quiet again, the only sounds the soft nickers and shuffling hooves of horses settling in for the night. Arabella stood alone in the courtyard, lantern light casting her shadow long and thin on the ancient stones. She felt the weight of exhaustion in every limb, but also a sense of hope, fragile, hard-won, but real. The sanctuary had stood its ground, not through violence or anger, but through the collective courage and loyalty of a community that refused to turn away. Outside, Duchess and Ash dozed together, safe for now. Outside, the moors stretched silent and vast beneath the stars. And somewhere on the night breeze, the words echoed still. You earn loyalty, you don't buy it. For the first time in many days, Arabella allowed herself to believe they might just win. Dawn crept across the moors, gray and hesitant, filtering through the old leaded glass of Brambleford Hall. The chaos of the day before had faded into uneasy silence, leaving Wildhaven in a strange, suspended peace. Arabella woke before the alarm, tangled in her sheets, heart thudding with anticipation and fear. She dressed quickly, her movements slow but deliberate, feeling every bruise and ache from the long days of resistance. Outside, the air was sharp and clean, the kind that made her lungs ache but her mind clear. In the sanctuary, the volunteers were already at work, feeding, cleaning, checking every fence post and water trough as if order alone could ward off trouble. Duchess and Ash stood side by side in their stall, heads touching, dozing in the morning calm. The scars along Duchess's body caught the thin light, their lines less harsh, less angry, softened by time and care. The investigation had moved quickly, too quickly, Arabella thought, for anyone to truly understand what was at stake. Inspector Morgan returned that morning, this time with a quiet seriousness that spoke of decisions made behind closed doors. He wasn't alone. 2 officials from Defra followed, their faces expressionless, clipboards in hand. A small group of villagers lingered by the fence, arms crossed, waiting for news, hope and worry written plainly on their faces.
Morgan asked to walk the grounds again, and Arabella led him through the stables, across the paddocks, past the battered but proud volunteers still nursing bruises and muddy boots. He paused at every corner, checking stalls, reviewing feed logs, watching the interaction between horses and their caretakers. He spoke little, asking occasional quiet questions about care routines, veterinary reports, the stormy night of Ash's rescue. Whitaker joined them, offering a professional, unvarnished account of Duchess's injuries and the healing he'd witnessed in both mother and foal. One of the Defra officials, a woman with sharp eyes, spent a long time by Duchess's stall. She watched the mare nuzzle Ash, saw the way Duchess stood between her foal and any stranger, protective but never aggressive. The official made notes, took photos, but kept her thoughts to herself. Arabella stood back, hands clasped, unable to do anything but wait. Inside the office, the Defra team reviewed Arabella's meticulous records. Receipts for feed and medication, printouts from the equine passport registry, reports from the vet students who had worked at Wildhaven. Morgan listened, his face unreadable, as Whitaker outlined the standard of care provided at the sanctuary, his tone steady, his words sharp and clear. Every fact, every observation was weighed, the balance shifting with every new detail. Montford's case, though loud and threatening in the public square, grew thin in the cold light of evidence. The scars on Duchess's body were old, most predating her arrival at Wildhaven. The burns and bruises she'd suffered in the fire had healed, documented by photographs and dated medical logs. Ash, though still small, was gaining strength every day, proof of attentive care and second chances. The officials asked about the night of the fire, how Ash had been found locked in a cage, how Duchess had followed the rescue truck for miles through smoke and flames. Arabella's voice shook as she told the story, but she refused to look away from their eyes. She described the frantic race against the wildfire, the terror of losing both horses in the dark, and the relief of seeing Duchess trust her enough to follow through the inferno. The Defra team left the office and spent the afternoon walking the sanctuary grounds. They spoke with villagers, volunteers, students. Each person shared the story in their own way, of how Duchess had arrived, how Arabella had refused to give up, how the sanctuary had become a place where both people and animals could heal. An old veteran told of standing at the gate during the standoff, saying he had never seen such loyalty from neighbors or strangers. A young student described how working at Wildhaven had changed her idea of what animal care meant, not just feed and shelter, but trust, patience, and respect. As dusk settled over the sanctuary, the officials gathered the core team in the barn. Morgan spoke first, his voice even, no hint of triumph or regret. The investigation, he explained, had found no evidence of neglect or abuse at Wildhaven, quite the opposite. The standard of care exceeded regulatory guidelines. The DEFRA team had concluded that Duchess and Ash should remain at Wildhaven, under Arabella's guardianship, for their safety and welfare. Montford's claims were dismissed. His own records showed gaps, missing reports, years of questionable horse transfers, and unexplained injuries. For the first time, the system weighed the truth of lived experience and found it stronger than reputation or wealth. Arabella felt a rush of relief and disbelief, her knees nearly buckling, as she pressed her palm to Duchess's warm neck. Around her, volunteers exchanged tired, watery smiles, some hugging, some simply standing still and breathing for the first time in weeks. Outside, the villagers let out a cheer that echoed over the fields, a sound of genuine, quiet victory. Morgan handed Arabella the official papers. Wildhaven was now the legal guardian of Duchess and Ash. The fight was over. She signed her name with trembling fingers, her heart full but heavy, knowing the battle had left marks on everyone, but also knowing something precious had been saved. As night fell, lanterns glowed in every stall. Arabella made her rounds in silence, checking every lock, every window, the small rituals of safety that meant so much now. In the barn, Duchess and Ash lay curled together in the straw, breathing deep and easy. Arabella leaned against the stall door, exhaustion pulling at her bones, but the old fear finally loosening its grip. The community lingered long into the evening, sharing food, laughter, stories of what had been risked and what had been won. No speeches, no grand declarations, just a shared understanding that the Moors had changed, that loyalty and care had rewritten what power meant, at least for now.
Arabella slipped outside before midnight, stepping onto the quiet, dew-soaked grass. The sky above the moors was wide and full of stars, cold and bright and full of promise. For the first time in so long, she let herself believe in tomorrow, in peace, in the stubborn hope that Wildhaven and all those who needed it would endure. Inside, Duchess lifted her head, eyes meeting Arabella's through the half-light. For the first time, Arabella sensed no fear, only trust, quiet and complete. In that moment, the scars of the past became part of the story of survival, a story not just for horses, but for all who had chosen to stand together, against the odds, for something good. Weeks passed, softening the memory of conflict, painting the sanctuary in gentler colors. The land itself seemed to exhale after long tension, each sunrise brightening the stone walls of Bramblefoot Hall, each sunset stretching golden over fields dotted with wildflowers and the wandering shadows of horses. Wildhaven pulsed with quiet renewal, an energy not of urgent rescue, but of slow, steady restoration. Arabella rose early every morning, her boots tracing familiar paths from stable to paddock, her hands busy with old, comforting routines, refilling water troughs, distributing fresh hay, listening for the subtle sounds of hooves and breath that spoke of health and calm. There was a new lightness in her step, a deeper quiet in her heart. Each day she paused at Duchess's stall, leaning against the weathered door to watch the silver mare graze, Ash never far from her side, both stronger than ever. The other horses sensed it too. A once skittish bay gelding let a volunteer brush him without flinching. Two older mares, who had spent months pacing nervously, began to nap in the warmth of the spring sun. The air was full of easy movement, swishing tails, playful snorts, the low thud of hooves in soft dirt. There was laughter from the volunteers, students swapping stories as they worked, the sense of crisis replaced by something gentle and enduring. Weeks passed, softening the memory of conflict, painting the sanctuary in gentler colors. The land itself seemed to exhale after long tension, each sunrise brightening the stone walls of Bramblefoot Hall, each sunset stretching golden over fields dotted with wildflowers and the wandering shadows of horses. Wildhaven pulsed with quiet renewal, an energy not of urgent rescue, but of slow, steady restoration. Arabella rose early every morning, her boots tracing familiar paths from stable to paddock, her hands busy with old, comforting routines, refilling water troughs,
distributing fresh hay, listening for the subtle sounds of hoofs and breath that spoke of health and calm. There was a new lightness in her step, a deeper quiet in her heart. Each day she paused at Duchess's stall, leaning against the weathered door to watch the silver mare graze, Ash never far from her side, both stronger than ever. The other horses sensed it too. A once skittish bay gelding let a volunteer brush him without flinching. Two older mares, who had spent months pacing nervously, began to nap in the warmth of the spring sun. The air was full of easy movement, swishing tails, playful snorts, the low thud of hooves in soft dirt. There was laughter from the volunteers, students swapping stories as they worked, the sense of crisis replaced by something gentle and enduring. Duchess had become a kind of legend, her story whispered by new arrivals, her scars seen not as wounds but as badges of survival. She and Ash now joined the small herd allowed to graze in the wildest fields, learning to move with the rhythms of the moor. Arabella watched the pair at dusk, their silhouettes outlined against the heather and purple sky, the foal's stride lengthening every day as confidence replaced fragility. A few weeks after the investigation closed, Arabella stood on the edge of the upper paddock, surrounded by veterans who had come for Wildhaven's new Moors Trust therapy program. Most were older, men and women marked by their own invisible scars, war, loss, years spent searching for a place that felt like home. At first, they hung back, stiff and wary, hands deep in jacket pockets or arms crossed against the wind. But the horses drew them out. Arabella paired each veteran with an animal, some gentle, some stubborn, some as battered as their human partners. She gave no orders, only an invitation to walk together, quietly, over the moor. The days unfolded at an unhurried pace. Old soldiers and anxious mares found solace in each other's presence, learning trust step by step. Arabella saw it in the small gestures, the veteran who bent to offer an apple, the horse who turned to rest its nose against a shaking hand, the deep, wordless relief when both realized they were safe. The moors absorbed all of it, the pain, the hope, the slow, healing work of time. Duchess and Ash became the program's heart. The foal followed the veterans with gentle curiosity, his long legs awkward but determined, nosing at pockets for treats, nibbling at trailing sleeves. Duchess watched over him, but also seemed to watch over the humans, her calm gaze settling anxieties and soothing the old wounds that words could never touch. On weekends, the sanctuary opened to visitors, families from the village, school groups, and those who had followed Wildhaven's story online. They arrived eager to see Duchess, the fire mare, to touch Ash's soft nose, to learn about the work of rescue and recovery. Arabella told their story simply, without embellishment, letting the facts speak for themselves. A foal rescued from fire, a mare who refused to give up, a community that stood together when it mattered most. The children listened wide-eyed, some slipping sugar cubes to Ash, others sketching pictures of the horses to take home. Parents lingered, asking quiet questions, offering words of thanks. Some brought food, others offered to volunteer. A few just wanted to stand for a while in the peace of the paddock, breathing the sweet air and listening to the low music of hooves and birdsong.
As spring turned to early summer, Wildhaven grew into itself. The fields, once blackened by fire and fear, shimmered green and purple. Arabella added a new sign to the sanctuary's gate: loyalty, not ownership; trust, not fear. She thought about all they had weathered, the legal battles, the storm, the barrage of doubt and anger, and felt a deep, quiet pride. The lessons were clear now, etched into every stone and every scar. Animals in England, she realized, were protected not by titles or the letter of the law alone, but by the unspoken promise of care, respect, and loyalty. Nobility had nothing to do with bloodlines or wealth. It was a choice made every day to defend the vulnerable and honor the trust placed in one's hands.
She saw it in the faces of her neighbors, in the steady presence of Whitaker, in the resilience of the horses, and the laughter of the volunteers. One evening, as the sun melted over the hills, Arabella sat beside Duchess on the highest rise above the sanctuary. The mare grazed quietly, Ash playing in the tall grass nearby, while Arabella looked out over the land her ancestors had loved and fought for. The wind carried the scent of heather, the soft chorus of distant birds. For a moment, the world felt perfectly balanced, past and future, loss and hope, struggle and triumph. She thought about trust, how it had changed everything. A wild horse had chosen to follow her through fire. A village had chosen to link arms against injustice. Strangers had chosen to believe and to help. It was trust, not money or power, that had saved Duchess and Ash, that had healed old wounds, that had woven a new legacy for Wildhaven. As dusk deepened, Arabella watched Duchess break into a slow, confident canter, mane streaming, Ash racing at her side. The golden light made the scars on her coat shimmer, not as reminders of pain, but as proof of survival, of love that endures. From the porch of the hall, a group of visitors watched, silent, moved by the sight of freedom reclaimed. The last rays of sunlight stretched over the sanctuary as Arabella rose, brushing grass from her jeans, heart full of gratitude and resolve. Wildhaven was safe, at least for now. Its legacy would be measured not by acreage or pedigree, but by every life saved, every second chance given, every act of trust returned. And as the evening air settled, Arabella's voice drifted over the moor, quiet and certain. If a wild creature can choose to trust us, then we must always strive to be worthy of that trust. That was the lesson, the legacy, and the promise she carried into the gathering night, beneath the endless, watchful sky.